December 20th, 1989. Before dawn, aircraft converged on Panama while paratroopers waited beneath red cabin lights. American forces were about to begin their largest combat operations since Vietnam. Their stated objectives were sweeping: protect American citizens, defend the Panama Canal, restore an annulled election, dismantle the Panama Defense Forces, and arrest Manuel Noriega. Yet the man at the center of the invasion had already disappeared into Panama City. How had a long-time American intelligence contact become Washington's most wanted ruler? And could overwhelming force capture him without leaving Panama to bear the cost? The road to Operation Just Cause began with geography. The Panama Canal cuts across the narrow bridge between North and South America, joining the Atlantic and Pacific through locks, lakes, and excavated channels. It replaced the long voyage around South America with a passage measured in hours. For the United States, the canal carried commercial value and strategic power. Ships could move between oceans without circling Cape Horn, while American bases guarded the route. Control of this corridor therefore shaped relations between Washington and Panama for most of the 20th century. France had attempted the project in 1881 after its success at Suez. Panama presented a different challenge. Tropical rain destabilized excavations, rivers flooded worksites, and disease swept through labor camps. Tens of thousands died before the French enterprise collapsed. The United States entered the story in 1903 when Panama separated from Colombia with decisive American support. United States warships discouraged Colombian intervention. The new Panamanian government then granted Washington extensive rights inside the Canal Zone, a strip that functioned for decades under American authority. American engineers adopted a lock canal, improved sanitation, and organized construction on an industrial scale. The waterway opened in 1914. Around it grew bases, schools, housing, and a separate American community. To many Panamanians, however, the Canal Zone represented lost sovereignty inside their own country. Protests and diplomatic pressure intensified. In 1977, President Jimmy Carter and Panamanian leader Omar Torrijos signed treaties that scheduled the canal's transfer at the end of 1999. The agreements also preserved a role for the United States in defending the canal's neutrality. Behind Torrijos stood an intelligence officer skilled at surviving political change. Manuel Antonio Noriega had trained in Peru and attended courses connected to the United States Army School of the Americas. After Panama's 1968 coup, he rose through military intelligence and became useful to American agencies seeking information about Cuba, Nicaragua, and regional movements. The relationship was transactional. Noriega supplied intelligence while accumulating files, leverage, and rivals at home. His pockmarked face inspired a mocking nickname, but the machinery of power he built was anything but comic. Torrijos died in a plane crash in 1981. Suspicion surrounded the disaster, although the source material does not establish that Noriega caused it. What followed is clearer. Noriega outmaneuvered competing officers and, by 1983, commanded the Panama Defense Forces. He controlled political decisions without always occupying the presidency. Surveillance, intimidation, patronage, and the threat of violence protected his position. His government also relied on civilian enforcers known as dignity battalions, whose loyalty ran to the regime rather than democratic institutions. The alliance with Washington deteriorated as evidence of corruption and brutality accumulated. The 1985 killing of physician and critic Hugo Spadafora became a regional scandal. His decapitated body was found near the Costa Rican border. The crime intensified scrutiny of the regime and deepened divisions within Panama's security establishment. At the same time, investigators linked Noriega to cocaine trafficking and money laundering associated with Colombian cartels. A man once valued for intelligence cooperation was increasingly seen as a liability who controlled armed forces beside one of the world's most important waterways. In 1988, federal grand juries in Florida indicted Noriega on drug trafficking and racketeering charges. The Reagan administration applied economic and diplomatic pressure while exploring a negotiated departure. Noriega refused to surrender power. Sanctions damaged Panama's economy but did not immediately break his command. The crisis then moved toward an electoral test. Panamanians voted in May 1989, with international observers present. Opposition candidate Guillermo Endara won decisively against the regime's chosen candidate, Carlos Duque. Noriega annulled the result. Television cameras recorded Dignity Battalion members attacking opposition figures in the streets. The images made the political conflict impossible to disguise. Later that year, Major Moises Giroldi and other officers attempted a coup after receiving uncertain signals of American support. The revolt collapsed. Giroldi and fellow conspirators were executed, and Noriega purged the ranks that remained. Each failed method narrowed the options. Negotiation had stalled, sanctions had hurt civilians, elections had been cancelled, and an internal military challenge had ended in bloodshed. The United States reinforced roughly 12,000 troops already stationed in Panama and conducted increasingly visible exercises. Tension rose around checkpoints and military installations shared by two hostile forces. On December 15, 1989, Panama's legislature declared that a state of war existed with the United States. Noriega adopted the title of maximum leader and delivered a defiant address. In a country containing tens of thousands of American residents, the declaration transformed an unstable confrontation into an immediate security crisis. The next evening, 4 American officers drove into a Panama Defense Forces roadblock after taking a wrong turn in Panama City. Gunfire struck their vehicle as they tried to escape. Marine First Lieutenant Robert Paz was killed. A Navy officer and his wife, witnesses to the incident, were detained and abused before their release. President George H.W. Bush cited these events alongside the defense of the canal, protection of Americans, restoration of democracy, and Noriega's indictment when he ordered military action. The Pentagon had maintained plans for a Panama contingency, including an earlier concept called Blue Spoon. General Maxwell Thurman, the newly arrived commander of United States Southern Command, pushed for speed, surprise, and simultaneous pressure. The operation received the name Just Cause. General Carl Steiner led Joint Task Force South. More than 27,000 American service members would participate, including forces already in Panama and reinforcements arriving by air. They faced a Panama Defense Forces establishment of roughly 15,000, although only a fraction were organized combat troops. The plan sought to paralyze the regime in a single night. Airborne troops would seize airfields and block reinforcement routes. Conventional forces would strike barracks and command sites. Special operations teams would attack escape routes, communications nodes, and selected high-value targets. More than 200 aircraft supported the movement. The scheduled opening was 1 in the morning on December 20th, but signs that Panamanian units were alerting prompted commanders to begin 15 minutes early. At 12:45, attacks opened across 27 objectives. Those objectives were connected by a strict operational logic. Airfields had to fall before reinforcements could arrive safely. Bridges and roads had to be controlled before Panama Defense Forces units could concentrate. Command posts had to be isolated before Noriega could organize a national response. Prisons and communications sites required small teams because a broad bombardment would endanger hostages and civilians. The design depended on many actions beginning almost together. If one assault stalled, aircraft, vehicles, and troops moving toward another target could enter a battlefield that no longer matched the timetable. American advantages were substantial. Night vision, secure communications, air mobility, armor, and close air support allowed units to operate after dark with a coordination the defending forces could not match. Geography still imposed limits. Panama City compressed military sites, homes, airports, diplomatic property, and canal infrastructure into a narrow urban corridor. A misturn could bring civilians into a firing line. A burning headquarters could ignite an adjoining neighborhood. A disabled runway could trap passengers as easily as soldiers. The same density that made a rapid decapitation strike possible also magnified every error. At Rio Hato, 2 stealth aircraft dropped large bombs near barracks occupied by elite units. The intended effect was shock and disorientation, not a direct strike on the buildings. The bombing did not produce the complete surprise planners expected. Rangers jumped from low altitude into darkness and incoming fire. Their formation assembled under pressure, then fought through the base for hours. By morning, the airfield was secure, and hundreds of Panamanian troops had surrendered. The battle demonstrated both the advantage of American night systems and the danger of assuming technology would erase resistance. Farther east, Rangers assaulted Tocumen and Torrijos airports, the country's principal international aviation complex. Aircraft landed, and paratroopers descended while troops moved across runways, terminals, and nearby military positions. A Brazilian airliner complicated the operation by leaving hundreds of passengers trapped inside the terminal. Civil affairs personnel helped separate civilians from the fighting and manage their release. Once the airport complex was secured, the United States controlled the main gateway for reinforcements and heavy equipment entering Panama City. The airborne flow continued after the first troops landed. Transport crews delivered vehicles, ammunition, medical support, and additional formations onto runways that had only recently been contested. Ground controllers worked around darkness, scattered equipment, and the presence of civilian aviation. The operation was therefore more than a collection of raids. It was a moving logistical system whose later stages depended on the first assault forces creating safe entry points. By dawn, American commanders could reinforce success faster than remaining Panamanian units could recover from the opening shock. At Paitilla Airfield, Navy SEALs received a mission intended to prevent Noriega from escaping in his private jet. A late change emphasized disabling, rather than simply destroying the aircraft. That requirement forced the team onto exposed pavement close to the plane. Panamanian fire struck the assault force. 4 SEALs were killed and 9 wounded. Under pressure, the survivors destroyed the jet with an anti-tank weapon. The escape route was closed, but the cost made Paitilla one of the operation's most painful engagements. Another SEAL element approached Noriega's patrol boat from beneath the water. Divers using closed-circuit breathing equipment placed explosives on the vessel. Guards detected movement, fired, and dropped grenades into the harbor. The divers sheltered beneath a pier until the charges detonated. On their withdrawal, a large ship forced them deeper than planned, increasing the danger created by their oxygen equipment. They survived, and the boat was disabled. Air and sea exits were narrowing, yet there was still no confirmed location for Noriega. The heaviest urban fighting centered on La Comandancia, the Panama Defense Forces headquarters beside the El Chorrillo neighborhood. American armored vehicles, infantry, helicopters, and gunships struck entrenched positions. Sheridan light tanks and Apache helicopters appeared in combat roles, while Panamanian troops and Dignity Battalion members returned fire. Special operations helicopters were damaged, and one small aircraft came down near the canal. Elsewhere, a small Green Beret force blocked the Bacora River Bridge, preventing an Eastern battalion from reinforcing the capital. The bridge action illustrated how a small engagement could influence the entire campaign. The Eastern troops, known as the Tigers of Tinajitas, could have added organized resistance inside the capital. Holding them beyond the bridge protected forces already committed around the headquarters and airports. Across Panama, similar blocking positions separated units that might otherwise have supported one another. The defending military was not destroyed everywhere at once. It was divided into local problems, then confronted by American forces that could shift information, aircraft, and fire support across the wider operation. After several hours, La Comandancia was shattered and the national command structure began to collapse. Fire then spread through nearby El Chorrillo, a dense neighborhood of wooden buildings. The precise origins and full scale of the blaze remained disputed, but its human consequences were undeniable. Homes burned, residents fled, and thousands were displaced. Images of destruction fueled international anger and became central to arguments over the invasion. Tactical success at the headquarters could not be separated from the civilian landscape surrounding it. Only streets away, another force carried out Operation Acid Gambit. American citizen Kurt Muse had been imprisoned for supporting clandestine broadcasts against Noriega. Delta Force operators arrived on the roof of Modelo Prison in small helicopters as a supporting team cut the lights. They breached downward, reached Muse's cell, and used a small explosive after gunfire failed to open its lock. The rescue took minutes. Enemy fire then forced the extraction helicopter into a hard landing on a Panama City street. The operators established a defensive position around Muse and signaled for overhead protection with an infrared marker. An armored carrier reached them and removed the entire group. Muse and every member of the rescue team survived. The episode became one of the night's clearest demonstrations of coordinated special operations. Yet its success did not solve the central problem. Noriega had escaped the initial net, and recordings carrying his voice urged supporters to continue resistance while American units searched the city. The regime's organized forces fragmented quickly, but disorder followed. Weapons circulated, police authority vanished in places, and looting spread through commercial districts. American troops shifted from assault to security, prisoner processing, searches, and protection of infrastructure. Guillermo Endara was sworn in as president, under American protection during the opening phase of the invasion. His installation restored the winner of the annulled election, but the circumstances also ensured that the new government began beneath the shadow of foreign military power. This transition exposed a contradiction inside the operation's goals. Removing the old security structure helped end Noriega's control, but it also removed the institutions that had policed streets, guarded businesses, and managed routine order. Soldiers trained for combat suddenly faced crowds, prisoners, traffic, frightened residents, and damaged utilities. Restoring civilian authority required more than capturing barracks. It required rebuilding confidence while foreign troops remained visible at intersections. Every delay risked making liberation look like occupation, especially to families whose homes or livelihoods had been lost. For several days, search teams moved through military offices, residences, a beach property, and other locations associated with the fugitive ruler. They found cash, weapons, art, personal collections, and materials interpreted as evidence of superstition and occult practices. Such discoveries fed sensational coverage, but none revealed his position. Noriega changed locations within the capital and considered continued resistance. The invasion had dismantled the state that protected him, yet capturing one man proved harder than defeating his command network. On Christmas Eve, the search changed direction. Noriega contacted Monsignor José Sebastián Laboa at the Vatican's Apostolic Nunciature and requested refuge. Laboa permitted him to enter, hoping to prevent further violence and persuade him to surrender. Noriega arrived with several officers, handed over weapons, and entered a diplomatic compound. American troops could surround, but not lawfully storm. The military victory became a negotiation conducted across walls, telephones, and the protections of international diplomacy. Psychological operations soldiers erected loudspeakers outside the nunciature. Music played at high volume, partly to pressure those inside and partly to interfere with journalists trying to overhear conversations. The playlist's taunting selections made the episode famous, but the tactic drew complaints from the Vatican and criticism within the American government. President Bush objected, and General Colin Powell ordered the music stopped on December 29th. From then on, clerical pressure, political appeals, and the narrowing of Noriega's options mattered more than amplified rock. Panamanian church leaders urged the Vatican not to provide a permanent sanctuary. Outside the compound, crowds demanded that Noriega face justice. Laboa warned that diplomatic protection could not become an indefinite shield and argued that surrender offered the safest outcome. Noriega sought passage to countries that might receive him, but no workable exit emerged. After 10 days inside the nunciature, his room had become a refuge with no future. The last stage of Operation Just Cause would end without a final firefight. At 8:45 in the evening on January 3, 1990, Noriega walked through the gate. American troops immediately took him into custody, and Drug Enforcement Administration agents arrested him under the federal indictments. He was flown to the United States, convicted, and imprisoned. Decades later, he returned to Panama to serve sentences connected to crimes committed under military rule. He died in 2017. The fugitive, who had outlasted bombing, raids, and roadblocks, was ultimately delivered by diplomatic isolation. The military balance had never been close, but the casualty record resists a simple victory narrative. 23 American service members were killed, and more than 300 were wounded. Panama Defense Forces deaths were reported in the hundreds, with thousands detained. Civilian estimates vary sharply among official, medical, journalistic, and Panamanian accounts. The uncertainty is itself part of the history. El Chorrillo's destruction, displacement, and grief cannot be reduced to a disputed number, even when no single figure commands universal agreement. Friendly fire added another warning. Fast operations at night placed aircraft and ground formations close to one another, while identification remained difficult. American deaths and injuries included personnel struck by their own side. Such incidents did not reverse the outcome, but they complicated claims that superior technology had made the battlefield fully controllable. Precision systems could guide weapons and help troops see in darkness. They could not remove confusion, fear, incomplete information, or the consequences of multiple units converging on crowded objectives. International reaction was divided. The United Nations General Assembly and the Organization of American States condemned the intervention as a violation of sovereignty. Critics saw a powerful country imposing its will on a smaller neighbor and creating a precedent for unilateral force. Many Panamanians who had endured repression welcomed the removal of Noriega and the end of military rule. Both realities shaped the aftermath. Liberation for some, and trauma for others, occupied the same streets. Panama returned to regular civilian elections and did not restore the old military system. The canal transferred to Panamanian control at the end of 1999, as the earlier treaties required. It became a major source of national revenue and remained open to global shipping. These outcomes mattered, but they do not erase the invasion's disputed legality or civilian losses. Nor does condemnation erase the fear created by dictatorship, cancelled elections, political killings, and armed intimidation. Operation Just Cause also became a bridge between military eras. The Berlin Wall was falling, the Soviet system was approaching collapse, and American commanders were studying what precision aircraft, night vision, joint planning, and special operations could achieve. Units that fought in Panama soon prepared for deployment to the Persian Gulf. The campaign appeared to validate speed and overwhelming coordination, while Paitilla, El Chorrillo, friendly fire, and the hunt for Noriega exposed the limits hidden inside that confidence. For the armed forces, Panama offered lessons at every level. Joint headquarters had synchronized conventional and special operations across numerous targets. Rangers, airborne infantry, naval teams, helicopters, gunships, armored vehicles, and civil affairs personnel had worked inside one compressed campaign. Yet command success could not guarantee perfect intelligence about a single fugitive, nor could tactical planning determine how burned neighborhoods would shape public memory. The operation showed that winning access to roads, runways, and headquarters was easier than controlling the political meaning of what happened there. So why did the United States invade Panama? No single answer is sufficient. The canal mattered. American lives mattered. The election mattered. Drug indictments mattered. Noriega's declaration and the killing at the roadblock accelerated decisions already years in the making. Strategic interest and democratic language were intertwined, not cleanly separated. The operation removed a dictator and restored an elected government, but it did so through an invasion whose costs fell heavily on Panamanians. The enduring question is not whether the operation succeeded militarily. It did, and quickly. The harder question is what kind of success history should recognize. A captured ruler, an open canal, and renewed elections form one side of the ledger. Civilian deaths, burned homes, disputed sovereignty, and the precedent of intervention form the other. Panama's story refuses the comfort of a single verdict. It asks whether force can be necessary, effective, and morally troubling at the same time.